several gas-producing and exporting countries will be broadcast by the Algerian radio thanks to its network of correspondents.
محمد بن سلطان مبعوث الإذاعة الجزائرية إلى العاصمة القطرية الدوحة.
سي دكار ثم ناخذ السنغال كريم الحاج محمد وش قالنا راديو ثغنوت.
بابا هوادف مبعوث الإذاعة الجزائرية إلى العاصمة الموريتانية نواكشوط.
You can follow the event from February 29 to March 2nd on the waves and digital platforms of the Algerian radio.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Ms. Naledi Pandor, on the sidelines of the 44th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council of the African Union. The heads of state and government of the African Union are meeting today in Addis Ababa as part of the 37th session of the EU Summit, placed to examine a series of issues, including the security situation in Africa and the Palestinian cause. And in the Middle East, the Israeli army has pursued its pounding of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, has congratulated the national badminton team for winning the Continental Seniors Trophy for the fourth consecutive time in Cairo, Egypt. The President of the Republic addressed a message to the national badminton team through his official account on social media to congratulate them for their win and victory, and thanked the technical and administrative staff, wishing them all the best in the future. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Ms. Naledi Pandor, on the sidelines of the 44th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council of the African Union. A press release from the Foreign Ministry here said that both sides reviewed the developments in the continuing genocide perpetrated by the Zionist entity against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and welcomed South Africa's judicial complaint before the International Court of Justice, ICJ, in full harmony with Algeria's relentless diplomatic efforts in the UN Security Council. According to the press release, the objective of this complementarity is to enforce the provisional measures issued by the ICJ and to achieve the common objectives aimed at stopping Zionist aggression, protecting civilians, and guaranteeing the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid while working towards a lasting solution to the Palestinian cause or to the Palestinian issue in line with the resolutions of the international legality. With regard to the latest developments in the Western Sahara issue, the two sides reiterated their support for the UN Secretary General and his personal envoy, Mr. Staffan de Mistura, for their efforts aimed at reviving the political process with a view to resolving the conflict in Western Sahara by allowing the Sahrawi people to exercise their inalienable and imprescriptible right to self-determination. The meeting was also an opportunity to consult and coordinate on the main issues on the agenda of the AU Summit, slated for February 17 and 18. Now, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has taken part in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in a ministerial meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee of the African Union for the Republic of South Sudan, or Committee of Five, C5, which is entrusted with supporting the parties to the crisis in the sister country in order to fulfill their commitments under the peace agreement signed in September 2018. In a speech delivered, Mr. Attaf stressed the need to consolidate the role of the committee and intensify its activities in support of stability in South Sudan, and this according to two processes. to two processes. Referring to the first process, the minister emphasized the need for the committee to act with regard to parties or to the parties at issue in South Sudan with a view to raising their awareness about the importance of the historical responsibility. As for the second process, the minister highlighted the importance of mobilizing the efforts of the various parties or to adhere to the peace process in South Sudan, especially as the country is going through a crucial and delicate stage ahead of the organization of the first elections in the history of this country, scheduled for the end of the current year.
I would like to recall from the outset that our committee has been created first and foremost to support this sisterly nation in the implementation of the 2018 revitalized agreement to end the conflict and enjoy the peace dividends. And I believe that we all agree that our help is more needed today as South Sudan heads towards a very sensitive phase in its history and a very important one, which translates in the elections scheduled by the end of this year.
That was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf. At the bilateral level, Mr. Attaf expounded Algeria's readiness to support the Republic of South Sudan for the organization of elections likely to put an end to the crisis with a view to effectively addressing the challenges besetting the country. It's worth recalling that the AU Ad Hoc Committee for South Sudan is made up of 5 states representing the 5 regions of the continent, namely Algeria, Nigeria, Chad, Rwanda, as well as South Africa. The heads of state and government of the African Union are meeting today in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as part of the 37th session of the AU Summit, placed this year under the motto Educating an Africa Adapted to the 21st Century. The African leaders will tackle the problematic of education, examine the reform of the AU bodies, notably the implementation of the Agenda of 2020 or 2063, and the activation of the African Force. They will also discuss several other regional and international issues, notably the Palestinian issue and the security situation in Africa. The African Union chairperson Moussa Faki Mahamat has expressed his will for the elections in Senegal to be inclusive, free and transparent, expeditiously following the cancellation of the postponing of the presidential elections, which triggered a crisis. The chairman declared at the opening of the AU summit that the situation in Senegal, a model country in terms of democracy, seriously worries the AU. He hailed the position of the Senegalese government for taking into consideration the decision of the Constitutional Council, which invalidated the decision of the Senegalese President Macky Sall to postpone the presidential elections. The Senegalese president committed himself to organize the presidential elections expeditiously following the advice of the Constitutional Council. To the Middle East now, where the Israeli army has pursued its pounding of the Gaza Strip, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. The news agency Wafa said that at least 100 people were killed in airstrikes that hit overnight districts east of the town of Gaza, as well as in the central part of the enclave. Other air raids targeted a refugee camp in Rafah in the southern part of Gaza. This came in the wake of an assault launched yesterday by the Israeli army against the Al-Nasser hospital in Rafah, where the situation is described as chaotic and disastrous by the Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders organization, after the medical staff and patients had been forced to evacuate. According to the World Health Organization, the facility is one of the 11 hospitals still operating out of the 36 existing in the Gaza Strip before the conflict. Palestinian sources put at over 28,800 the number of people killed in the Israeli relentless bombardments on Gaza. In the meantime, the international community reiterated its pleas, urging Israel to reconsider its plan to launch an offensive on the overcrowded town of Rafah, where nearly 1.5 million displaced people are massed. In this connection, the European Union expressed deep concern at such a perspective and called on Israel not to undertake a military action in Rafah that will worsen an already disastrous humanitarian situation. The U.S. President, for his part, pleaded for a truce to be enforced in the Gaza Strip, saying he hoped no ground operation will be launched by the Israeli army in the meantime. This came as protests were staged in Argentina and in the U.S., notably outside the New York Times headquarters, to denounce the ongoing Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for a new global order that works for all during his speech at the 60th edition of the Munich Security Conference held in Germany. The Secretary General stressed that the global order was not working for anyone and that the world is facing existential challenges with an international community more fragmented and divided than at any time during the past 75 years. He added that crises multiplied and that a global order that benefits everyone must fill the gaps and bring solutions. He emphasized that if countries fulfilled the UN Charter obligations, every person on earth would live in peace and dignity. Addressing the situation in Gaza, the UN Secretary General said that the situation was an appalling indictment of the deadlock in global relations, stressing that nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Let's listen to the Secretary General.
Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Israel's military response. The humanitarian aid operation is now on life support. It's barely functioning. Humanitarians are working under unimaginable conditions, including live fire, multiple physical obstacles and Israel restrictions, as well as the breakdown of public order. Rafah is at the core of the entire humanitarian aid operation. An all-out offensive on the city would be devastating for the 1.5 million Palestinian civilians there who are already on the edge of survival. I've repeatedly called for an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and a humanitarian ceasefire. That is the only way to massively scale up aid delivery in Gaza. And this must be the foundation for concrete and irreversible steps towards a two-state solution based on international law and United Nations resolutions.
That was the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now to Africa, where the Goma airport in North Kivu in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo was hit by a bomb in the region where fights against the M23 rebellion are taking place. Government forces were not able to provide immediate indications on damage caused by the engine or where it comes from. And the minister, back to Algeria, where the Minister of Transport, Mohamed El Habib Zahana, met his Czech counterpart, Martin Kupka, now on a 3-day working visit to the Czech Republic on the promotion of bilateral cooperation. Accompanied by a delegation composed of representatives and executives of companies in the field, in the presence of the Algerian ambassador to the Czech Republic, Belkacem Zermati, Mr. Zahana reviewed with his Czech counterpart several opportunities of bilateral cooperation in the transport sector, notably air transport, by examining the draft air transport agreement between the two countries. The minister also met executives of the Czech Republic Chamber of Commerce and Economic Operations. On the occasion, Mr. Zahana and the accompanying delegation visited the bus manufacturing group Iveco Bus and the aircraft manufacturing group Aircraft. Preparations for the holding of the 7th Summit of the Heads of State and Government of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, GECF, scheduled from February 29 to March 2nd in Algiers, are underway, with all the stakeholders working at their own levels for the success of this global event. For its part, our radio is also continuing its coverage of the summit preparations with the holding of conferences, debates, and interviews, among other things. Radio Algeria International has organized in its premises a debate forum to discuss the upcoming gas forum and the global developments of the gas market. Jordanian expert in energy Mahmoud Salama, invited by Radio Algeria International to participate in the forum, hailed Algeria's essential role in the global oil and gas market, saying that this summit will be a turning point in the world. Let's listen to him.
The forum is a source of pride for Algeria and will mark a decisive turning point in the world towards the creation of a gas organization that resembles OPEC, which will constitute a turn in world politics and in the role that gas plays in the global sphere, and beyond that, the role that Algeria plays in the field. Algeria is an essential gas and oil producer, and which has always been a dove of peace both in OPEC and in the forum or in any other peace forum in the world. I think that this forum will support Algeria's role as the main gas producer and will consolidate the role of gas as a gateway to the energy transition from fossil energies to renewable energies.
That was Jordanian expert in energy Mahmoud Salama speaking to Radio Algeria International. In anticipation of this crucial event, the capital Algiers hosted a conference on energy security in light of energy developments and global geopolitics. The conference, organized by the National Higher School of Political Sciences and the Center for Political Studies and Research in Africa, addressed the crucial issue of energy security and Algeria's role in this race for energy resources. Former Minister of Energy and Water Resources and international energy expert Abdelmajid Attar spoke during the conference about the central role that our country plays in the world energy scene.
Algeria is important within the forum not because of its production and reserves, as it is outpassed by other countries, but because it is currently located at the center of the energy scene.
Mr. Attar specified the central role that our country plays in the face of the growing demand of the European market of energy.
First, it is practically the largest gas reserve as the largest gas exporter from Africa. It is the most important in the Mediterranean basin, so we don't produce a lot, but we enjoy a strong position in the European market because the European market is at the origin of this war.
Mr. Abdelhamid Attar also expounded during the conference the challenges of the current global race for energy resources in the context of the celebration of the summit of the Forum of Gas Exporting Countries. It's worth recalling that the 7th Algiers Summit builds on the legacy of its predecessors in order to contribute to the evolution of the global natural gas industry. The organizers assured that the summit constitutes a primary platform to foster international dialogue and cooperation, address critical energy challenges, and shape the future of the natural gas industry. The summit is also of a global importance with the participation of leaders, delegates, and stakeholders from around the world. And with this special program devoted to the 7th Summit of the Gas Exporting Countries that is going to be held here in Algiers from 19th February to March 2nd, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for a weekly program with our colleague Miriam Bershi. And as for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow for a first edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International, and bye-bye for now.
Welcome to our special program, Inspiring Figures. Today's program is dedicated to the life, teachings and legacy of the esteemed Jalaluddin Rumi. Jalaluddin Rumi was one of the great spiritual masters and poetic geniuses of mankind, and the Mevlevi Sufi order was founded to follow his teachings. He was born in 1207 in Balkh in present-day Afghanistan to a family of learned theologians. Escaping the Mughal invasion, he and his family traveled extensively in Muslim lands, performed pilgrimage to Mecca, and visited Medina. The journey brought the family to Erzincan and then Qom-Rahman, where Rumi studied for a short period in the Halabi school. 1228, at the invitation of the Sultan of Seljuk, Alaeddin Keykubat, they settled in Konya, Anatolia in present-day Turkey, then part of Seljuk Empire. Jalaluddin married and lived with his wife, Gevher Hatun, who bore him 2 children. He is called Rumi, meaning Anatolian, because of his life in that place. He also gained the title Mevlana, which means our master, through his life's work there. Rumi's tomb is in Konya, Turkey. When his father Baudin Veld passed away in 1231, Rumi succeeded him as a professor in religious sciences at the largest theological school in Konya. Only 24 years old, Rumi was already an accomplished scholar in religious and positive sciences. He died on the 17th of December 1273 in Konya, where he had spent most of his adult life and composed all his works, and where his tomb lies today. Although Rumi had already succeeded to his father's position as a teacher, when the great scholar and Sufi Burhanuddin al-Tirmidhi arrived in Konya, Rumi studied under him and devoted himself to his service for 9 years. This training was focused on divine love, worship, austerity and abstinence, piety, consciousness of God, humility and tolerance, which are the foundation of Sufism. Rumi spent his days mostly praying and serving people who came to visit the Sufi center, preparing food for them, collecting wood for cooking and heating, and cleaning the toilets and bathroom used by visitors. He thus learned the merit of serving people and knew what serving people is ultimately serving God. On Burhanuddin's advice, Rumi completed his scholarly education in Aleppo, mastering also the classical Islamic sciences, including jurisprudence, fiqh, commentary on the Quran, tafsir, tradition, hadith, and epistemology, usul. There was thus a number of significant figures in Rumi's spiritual development. Apart from his father and Burhanuddin, he made many great philosophers and scholars of the age, including the renowned Ibn Arabi in Aleppo and Damascus, and others in Konya under the patronage of the Seljuk court. He thus acquired both the inner and outer sciences within 16 years. The most famous and probably the most fruitful relationship in his development was with Shams Tabriz, who he met in Konya at the suggestion of Ruknuddin Zarqubi. Modern historians may argue about who influenced whom in their long association, but this is not profitable. What we know is that for a particular period of time, 2 skillful and acute spirits came together, and by sharing the divine bounties and gifts they received from their Lord, they reached peaks that most would not be able to reach easily on their own. To this day, the place where the 2 first met in Konya is known as Mark's El Bahrain, the meeting point of the 2 oceans. Through their spiritual cooperation, they enlightened those of their own age and have also influenced all the centuries which followed. Following the departures of Shams, Rumi continued to compose his works and to develop the principle that would be followed by the older form and named in his honor after his death. He started to live in seclusion and abstinence, practicing ascetics in series of 3 periods of 40 days. Eating a little, talking a little, and sleeping a little were essential components of this discipline. Here it is important to remember that while Rumi was informed by numerous sources of ideas on his journey, he seemed to leave many of his contemporaries behind. His love and compassion flowed like the waters of the world's oceans. So much so that while continuing to live physically among humans, he managed to become ever closer to God. He never never elevated himself above others, but his writings, both during his life and after his entering into eternal life, provide a guiding star which reflects the light of the spiritual life of the Prophet of Islam. Thus he is among the few figures who have exerted great influence over large parts of history and large regions of the world. Rumi's poetry and prose writing have a spiritual content that is the universal language of the human soul. They speak of the spiritual journey of man's essence through the mind and love to perfection. His works were recorded, collected and compiled during his lifetime and after his death by his son, his friends and his students, particularly his much-loved disciple Husamuddin Chelebi. He passed away in 1273. Muslims, Christians, Arabs, Persians, Turks and Romans honored him at his funeral, and men of faith followed his bier. That night was named Shebul Arus, the night of the union with the divine. Ever since, the Mevlevi dervishes have kept that date as a festival. Although Rumi was known and loved during his lifetime by the Christians in his immediate environment, the West only came to know him many centuries later, in part because the great German poet Goethe, one of the fathers of the hugely romantic movement, came to know and be influenced by some of the works of Rumi through the translations of the Austrian historian Joseph von Hammer. Even though most Islamic scholars would argue that von Hammer's translations were for the most part inadequate, nevertheless the power and beauty of Rumi's thought, mysticism and love shone through. By this route, Rumi has long been a strong, albeit indirect, influence on religious, cultural and even political life in Europe and the United States, and provides a real point of unity for East and West. The current truth and great potential of this cultural meeting is best proved by the fact that Rumi has been the best-selling poet in the United States for the last 13 years. Rumi's life and works show us that it is not faith, belief and religion which cause hatred, conflict and violence, but the sins of hatred and greed and other symptoms of the unrestrained ego. And he showed us how the true practice of religion, the purification of the heart, is the remedy for these. In our days, his life and works are a reminder to all that the clash of civilization is far from inevitable, and they show us how to derive hope, renewal and reconciliation rather than despair, fear and enmity from our differences. He invites us to call constantly to mind that we are all one. From God we come, and to God we will return. Thanks for joining us for this program focused on the renowned poet and spiritual master Jalaluddin Rumi. See you next week for another program.
العالم يتغير وبسرعة، ونحن نتابع وبدقة نحاول الوصول إلى الحقيقة.